Oh, hey. Welcome to the City of Eureka Springs Planning Workshop for Fences. We are open at City Hall at the auditorium in the basement. So we are starting our discussion involving fencing and freestanding walls. And I'm going to let Cassie pick up from here and tell us what we got.
All right, so I provided a few things as just sort of a starting point for any discussion we want to have. The first is the guidelines that the Historic District Commission uses for the Eureka Springs Historic District regarding fences. You'll see that there's a slightly different set depending on if it is considered a historic neighborhood or a non-historic neighborhood in the historic district. As of now, these are the only fencing regulations we have in the city, at least as far as I'm aware, outside of whatever the International Building Code might dictate. I've also provided a couple examples of ordinances that Paul had provided to me earlier this year. I believe they are from the Fayetteville Municipal Code, but Paul can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
And Paul, if you want to come up to the microphone, our code inspector here for the city.
By the way, congratulations on your permanent assignment to our...
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Anybody want to start the discussion?
Well, we're just trying to carry over something into the non-Victorian districts that are not already addressed with this first addendum, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to see about...
But remember, there's no ordinance today.
Yeah.
So this is a guideline the Historic Commission uses. Now, we can adopt this outright and use this throughout the city. We can modify it. Right now, currently, there is, correct me if I'm right or wrong, Paul, but there is no current city ordinance for fence.
Yes, you said there. But if we were to adopt anything that would be stricter than this would have to go back to them too, because right in the city code, anything we pass, you always have to adopt a more stringent requirement.
Correct. If you were to do something stricter than what's in the guidelines, then the historic district would abide by that.
Yeah, they have to. Yeah, they would have to overhaul their process to comply with that, whatever we make.
I don't think they'd have to overhaul it. I would just point out this is now municipal code and it's stricter than the guidelines, and so that's what we'll use.
Paul?
I was looking at an email. Go ahead and say it again. It's about a fence, too. So that's a one. So
I just have a question for you. You've been here a lot longer than me, and many of you here. The guidelines that are in here for the historic district, would you recommend them as far as just carrying over into the rest of the Eureka Springs, or what would you recommend?
I really haven't read too much on the historical guidelines, except I kind of know a little bit about them just from history, but I don't think any of the historical guidelines has anything about chain link fence, does it, Cassie?
There's a little bit on chain link fence, particularly in non-historic neighborhoods. Those that are coated in black or green vinyl are allowed in rear yards no taller than 6 feet, but they're still not permitted in front yards.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing here, what we're looking at is what you want, how it to look is like I had a person ask me if he could put a 6-foot fence up in his front yard. There's guidelines from highway and roads and all this stuff, plus ICC that requires that whenever you go through up to a driveway, that fence you can't be able to see through that fence on intersections and stuff like that. So I think really what I'm wanting direction from is what you want your front yard and what you want your backyard to look like. I mean, if you're okay with the privacy fence in the backyard. Sorry, Susan.
And one other thing go ahead, I'm sorry, Susan.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so in that historic preservation addendum, it does say that new fences, including wooden picket designs, must be a maximum of 42 inches in front. So you do have, according to this, there is a 42. Is 42 adequate?
I think 42 is adequate.
I mean, it's not too tall.
No.
It'd be about the right height for a vehicle, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then it goes into some of the other things too. But wood fences in the back of 8 feet, and then chain link in the back, maximum of 6 feet.
Did you say wood fences maximum 8 feet?
Yeah, it says wood fences for privacy should be located in rear yard no taller than 8 feet.
And our code requires that at 7 foot, they have to have a permit, so.
The city code says that you can't have anything over 7 feet unless it's permitted.
ICC requires a permit at 7 feet.
Okay, so is this,
I think if you want to keep it like it is, if it's fine, they would just have to have it permitted. They would have to have it permitted, yes.
so on the application, it would need to state how tall is this fence and,
Correct.
okay. The only other question I have is, and maybe I'm just not reading it correctly. It says perimeter, this is for historic again, perimeter fencing is any fence built within 3 feet of the surveyed property boundary that is at least as long as 95% of that side of the surveyed property boundary. So does that mean it has to be at least 95% on one side?
Repeat that again, please.
Okay, it says perimeter fencing is any fence built within 3 feet of the surveyed property boundary that is at least as long as 95% of that side of the surveyed property boundary. So to me, it sounds like they're saying it has to at least be 95% of that side, whatever side you're wanting to put that fence on. Does that sound accurate?
I believe they're just putting a definition for what is perimeter fencing versus what is other types of fencing.
And that's what I agree.
Because down at garden fencing is allowed in certain areas, but not as perimeter fencing.
Okay.
I would agree with what Cassie said. It's probably a definition.
And is the 3 foot, 3 feet from the surveyed boundary adequate?
I think so. I think that's probably part of that definition. They're saying the perimeter fencing, if it's within 3 feet of that boundary, they're calling it perimeter fencing. Is that correct? Yeah.
Okay. I always thought there was a 10 foot. Well, anyway, never mind. Okay.
And you asked me if that was adequate. I would say
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're up. Over.
Go ahead.
No, he's up. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Scott?
Paul, I'd like just a little clarification on the parsing of the word guideline. How does that relate to actual ordinance?
Correct.
Because guideline is a suggestion, or
Could you speak in the microphone a little bit better?
how do the word guideline reflect with the ordinance that are written?
I can address this one, Paul.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the Eureka Springs Historic District Commission uses the Eureka Springs Design Guidelines to judge what things are in their purview in the historic district, because they have to review all changes made to the exteriors of buildings and properties. And while the design guidelines are not specifically in code, code does say in Chapter 2 in the Historic District section that the Historic District Commission may develop guidelines to aid them in their process. So that is why we use the guidelines. I would agree with you that they're not, depending on the guideline, they are not as strict as code as far as those instances where you say absolutely yes, absolutely no, but they do have the weight of code.
So I'll ask one other question to that. Are the guidelines included in the application?
I do not include the guidelines in the application that I give to people, but they can access them for free online at our website. I also often, if I'm emailing someone, will send them, a copy of the relevant portion. So if they're wanting to replace windows, I will pull a PDF of the window section and send them that so they can sort of have a basis.
Okay, go ahead, Michael.
If we choose to go with any kind of adjustments or carry on, it's going to be for any new construction, right? We're not going to retroactively make everybody in the city retroactively follow these guidelines, are we? I mean, they have to tear up their fences and put new fences in. If we put this retroactive, right, it's going to be for effective any day that if we either pass it and adopt it, would be effective going forward.
It's up to the commission, but yes, they could make it active as a certain date going forward, or like you said, retroactive. But I'm assuming that we want to move forward
Yeah.
in time and not back.
Yeah, I don't want to back.
It's a great question. In fact, it's a fundamental question.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, and I just use the term loosely, it's a can of worms, but I think it's an important one, or the fencing thing could get out of control. It seems to me that if we're going to do this right, we're going to break it down in various categories, and those are going to be residential, commercial, and then those are broken down on what does not require a permit in ordinance, and then what does require a permit. And then, to your point, then what is a non-conforming acceptable use, and then what would be a use, as we do see around, unfortunately, some temporary, shabby-looking fences that don't conform to anything, really, that would be given a period of time in which there would be some corrective measures. So if we're going to dive into this, and I think it's worthwhile, we need to know that it needs to be really all-encompassing, or we're going to do two things. We're going to shoot ourselves in the foot, right? Because we're going to miss a lot of things. And then secondly, we're going to create the ire of a lot of people, in the public. And so it needs to be well thought out. And my suggestion would be, as a good place to start, would be to agree on the things that not necessarily we want to include, but we would want to make sure that we want to exclude in terms of acceptance. And those would be height, front, back, general materials, and limit that. So if we all agree we don't want new chain link fences, and we agree that they should not be more than 42 inches in the front yard, then let's check that box. No chain link, no chicken wire, no barbed wire in the front yard. That's box number one. And then we go we agree on those things, or try to, that we believe are just not good. And then we work ourselves through that. There's a difference between historic residential, non-historic residential, and commercial. They have different needs. So if we're going to do this, I suggest we hit the high notes first in those categories, and then we back into some of the nuance, such as in the historic district.
There it goes.
I have a follow-up on your comment there. So, as an example, say I have a fence that's been kind of grandfathered in after these guidelines go in, and there's, say, 25% damage to it. Do I just go ahead and repair 25%, or do I have to wait till like 50% and then the whole thing has to be replaced?
Yeah, fair enough.
The new guidelines.
Fair enough. I mean,
That's going to happen where,
that's what I say. When we start to peel back this onion, let's be prepared to get down to the detail.
Yeah,
but those kind of answers really, we don't get there until we hit the high notes.
So would that be on a case-by-case basis then?
That's
Or,
it's a collective. I think that's a collective decision. I don't think there's any ordinance about that now, is there?
Paul's going to have to do the enforcement on that.
So the question about if there's damage on 25% of the, so the way we do a lot of our building codes is if there's 50% damage, over 50% is where that number is. You asked about the grandfathered in too. This has anything to do with the existing fences. It's all about the new fencing that goes in. And what David said is if you get all that stuff, what he just got through telling you about is the priorities, I think you would hit everything what you want to get.
Mm-hmm. Okay, can you back up on that just a little bit? Are you saying that if someone has an existing fence, and right now a tree fell on it and it took out 50% of the fence, are you saying that then, because there's 50% that has been damaged, the city could go to them and require them to repair it, or require them to replace it with new materials?
So let's just say that someone has maybe a 6-foot chain link fence in their backyard, and you didn't allow that 6-foot fence. Your height was 5 foot.
Okay.
And just say they have 50% damage on that fence, and they want to replace the whole fence. They could probably replace just the fence that's damaged with the same height. But if they want to replace the whole fence, we would say you have to follow the code.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Well, conceptually, it's basically the same thing as if you had a structure destroyed,
Exactly.
right? That had a non-conforming acceptable use. If it's destroyed, would you allow it to be put back under the non-conforming guidelines?
And that's where it goes back to that the non-conforming guidelines is not in the code as much as it is per your code. We go by that 50%. However, you have to work with those non-conforming guidelines too. So,
I have a question too.
Go ahead, Mike.
Now, moving forward, though, it's not really toward Paul of us. For us, moving forward, we have to break it down into districts, right? Because if you have a commercial district, you should be able to put up a 6-8 foot privacy fence in front of your business, like if you have a wrecking yard or whatever, to keep the public from just driving by and peeking over it. I mean, and then agriculture zones. Do we have any agriculture zones?
Yeah.
They would have to be exempt from the no barbed wire, no electric wire. I mean, each district is going to have to be. If we're going to start enforcing code on this fence, each district is going to. We have to compensate for the needs within that district, because we can't just say nobody can have a bigger, higher than 5 foot fence, because that's, companies that don't like these tow yards and stuff. They don't want little fence there so people can be climbing over at night and breaking into their cars. So there's a lot of factors involved. I mean, we're going to have to break down each section.
I will say this, nobody likes interfere and nobody dislikes interfering with property rights more than me. However, there are choices that you make, good and bad, when you come into incorporated city. And of course, you're right. The guidelines are going to be different in a commercial environment, but they're multiple. How far do we drill down in that? But to the extent that you are locating within a city, any city, there's benefits and then there's some negatives. And some of those negatives are there's other things you have to comply with. And but again, I think we have to hit the high notes here, break it down: residential, historic residential, commercial, and then what's required for permitting, what's not required for permitting, standard guidelines, and then go from there.
I think one of the advantages in our book is that we already have those zones identified. Right. So just like when we do our CUPs and different things like that, it says this is what is permitted in this particular zone. So we would already have those established. We just have to be aware of what is currently in those particular zones.
Well, I think for like the historic.
Recognized.
Oh, sorry.
Good. No, Cassie, go ahead.
And I just wanted to say that while we don't currently have any, what I would say a general fence code or ordinance, there are specific instances where fencing is called for. One of those being, like an auto shop.
Yeah.
Fencing, if they're parking cars in the front, then they have to have a privacy fence.
Yeah.
Right.
And then where does that come from? Does that come from the city, or does that come from, is it Paul that's going out and saying, hey, by the way, you have to put a fence up?
It would be, because it's in the zoning code. It's in chapter 14.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what I meant. That's what I said. So I was saying, if we make any changes, we have to compensate for that, because that's one of the
Yes.
things I was discussing.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Scott?
Go ahead. Sure.
Well, I was going to say, with the historic district, we need to maintain the aesthetics of our community. I think that's primary. And then it just kind of tears down from there. Because certainly no one wants to look at
Correct.
cars at, in the business
Right.
when, it could be, disguised in some way.
Yeah, and going back to David's analogy of that onion, peeling an onion. If we were to focus on just the residential zones, and one of the things that I like about the historic district, it talks about the frontage, the front of the building, and if we were to restrict, create, our first stab at doing a fence code of just being the frontage of a building that's visible from the street. And writing a residential ordinance that specifically is only encompassing that. The residential is in historic and non-historic zones, but only the front visible from the street. We wouldn't go into the backyards for now. We wouldn't, just for the initial attempt at this.
I think as far as Paul's job goes, I think it would be better if we just did the whole thing, because
What do you think, Paul?
otherwise he's going to get people coming in and they're going to be saying, well, there's nothing in the code that says I can't do it right now, and he's got 50 projects of people wanting to put up a 6-foot chain link fence.
So keep in mind, I don't have a lot of calls on fencing now. However, I do have calls for some fencing that's, I would say, unusual, like a 6-foot privacy fence in the front yard, or I think HDC's got an application about a gate across a driveway. So those are things that you need to take in consideration. And like you said, if you work with that front yard right off, that's probably the start, and residential is a good start, and then just keep adding to that.
Right. I think that's how we should do it. I think we're going to, as we develop, because we're all going to be creating stuff that hasn't been created, and we can, like I said, balance a little bit, and probably most of the historic has already been done from the historic district, and we can basically just create in our code book, an ordinance that specifically says this is the ordinance for fencing in Eureka Springs.
My only concern would be, how many times do you want to take this back to city council? You know our opportunities.
No, I know.
I mean, we have opportunities to go and present things to them, but how long do you want that process to be? Because, we know, based on what we've done in the past, there have been some things that have taken quite some time. So, and then we've had workshops and different things like that. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with getting it right. I'm just saying that if you do the front yard, then you're going to inevitably have to go back and do the backyard.
Right.
And then, is that only residential now? And then we go back again and we do commercial. How many times do you want to go back?
Yeah, you have a
and
point.
do that?
I agree.
So,
yeah, that's true. Go ahead, Tom.
On number D, talk about retaining walls. We allow railroad ties and timbers are permitted for retaining walls. Are we doing the property owner kind of a disservice because of that? Years ago we had, creosote cross ties, and they lasted a long time. EPA came in and, of course, changed that, and now the cross ties, they don't last very long anymore. Should we just prohibit that rather than let them put something in that 8 or 10 years is going to be gone? Or
It's really up to you, but on what you want on that, I wasn't prepared to talk about retaining walls here, but you're talking about for fencing purposes?
just retaining walls?
well, yeah, I'm looking at the number D on the fences and standing walls and non-tropical district. It's in the proposed number D. Railroad ties and timbers are permitted for retaining walls.
I don't think I printed one for Ann.
This is in the addendum?
I'm looking at
Page
On the
2.
backside.
backside.
Page 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Number D on the back, yeah.
I
So
presume
this
that's what
was
we're
under
talking.
historical guidelines?
Yeah. Non-historic neighborhoods.
Yes.
Oh, non-historical neighborhoods, okay. Yeah, that would be something that you would, really depends on what you want on that. I was going to go back to Susan's real quick, then I'll answer that to you, Tom. But Susan said, maybe we hit everything of it. I think you're going to find that your backyard's going to be the most easiest because you're going to allow more in the backyard than the front. And if you did the front and the back, it would be, like she said, getting off of there. And I think your backyard's going to be the easiest of all of it. Go back to your, where were we at? D, on railroad ties and timbers are permitted for retaining walls. That's really, are you interested in keeping that, Tom, or are you not wanting to go with that? Because I was talking more about chain link fence, wood fences and stuff like that.
I would say on that, it's important to remember that HDC's primary function is design review. So from an aesthetic standpoint, railroad ties and timbers may be permitted for retaining walls. Is that practical? Is that actually doable? Is that something that, Paul and our other city officials are going to get out there and go, oh yeah, that's a material that works? I don't know. I also don't know, I have not looked at the retaining wall sections of our municipal code. That could be totally null and void somewhere else in code already. It would be worth looking at.
Well, I think in the case of the historic district, though, because everything that's done in the historic district, if there is an application, if somebody were to come and say, hey, I want to put up a retaining wall, I just know that, the majority of the time they're going to come and look and see what they think anyway. So, it's probably more of an expense to the homeowner than it is to the commission to approve it. I would think, unless you're looking at it as an environmental thing. I mean, I know there are some retaining walls that were put together with the timbers close by where I live, and they're maybe 5 high, and they've rotted out like in 2 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of homeowners don't understand that cross ties, they think they last forever, but they don't.
Right.
I'm saying you may be doing a disservice thinking they can do that, and just kind of uninformed citizens, whatever.
Well, I think it'd be appropriate to tackle it at first that subject to the design review committee in the historic, subject to those areas in a historic neighborhood where the historic preservation guidelines would be taken into account for permitting, that here are our basic requirements, right, for sign, because we have a lot of other houses that are not in the Victorian neighborhoods. And I think that's kind of the bulk of the Victorian neighborhoods. I know there's some stuff that needs to be put in line and so forth, but it's some of the other neighborhoods that we don't want to let get too far gone, and that's where the real issue is. And so again, I go back to see if we could come to some things that we generally agree on, and those would be very simple on heights in the front and backyard, right? Then secondly, rather than define the materials, let's eliminate the materials that we prefer not to see.
Correct.
And so we'd prefer not to see, unpainted or chain link fences, chicken wire, those type of things. We'd prefer not to see barbed wire on top. So we go through those things that we just don't like. We prefer to see fences 42 inches or less, or maybe even as high as 4 feet in the front yard, and in the backyard no more than 7 feet. Start with those things that we can get a general consensus on, and then work into some of this. Because you said this about city council. You're exactly right. We want to hit some high notes. We want something that makes a lot of sense going in. Then the planning commission can tackle some more details maybe later.
Right.
A question for you, Paul. With retaining walls, is there an engineering component in there?
Say that one more time.
With retaining walls, is there an engineering component? Because
If it goes over 7 feet,
okay,
if
wouldn't the materials involved?
well, like say for instance, you have a concrete wall that's going to do. I think it's 42 inches for any type of rock wall that is for a retaining wall. I'd have to look at that, but I'm pretty sure it's 42 inches.
I think that's correct.
And there's some other elements we'd want to define to make sure that there's no misunderstanding when you put in a fence, because most homeowners are just putting in a fence, right? They can't be within a certain distance of a fire hydrant. They can't interfere with the public right-of-way or easement. An important thing here is they can't block the pathway of drainage. So if there's an obvious drainage channel, even though that's in your property with your easement, you build a fence down that drainage, it's diverting water on another person's property. So I think it's just kind of some practical common sense things here that we start with, and we see it all the time.
Talking about the city council now brought me, if we were to go forward with this and break it down into like commercial zones, we would make our recommendations, and then we would submit that to the city council, and then each section of the town that we made, and saying hypothetically whatever changes we made, we would want to send it to them one at a time for their consideration. Because if you sent 5 different, 3 or 4 different residential district things that we wanted to change, it would take them forever to get that stuff.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully.
Sit back to it.
Yeah, I think we're
changes.
the initial efforts are to protect the integrity of the neighborhoods in general, and many of the Victoria neighborhoods are policed pretty well. I mean, you all that have property there and see you see a different way than I do, maybe in the public, and I have a property outside that, but they're made pretty well. What we're trying to avoid is the 6-foot chain link fence with barbed wire with slats, multicolored slats through it. I'm serious. So this is a preemptive measure, and also to give the inspector some teeth in which to be able to help with enforcement of those type of temporary fences which are not in compliance.
Yeah.
Susan, go ahead.
So I've got a couple things. So, Cassie, how many I know on one of the items here on H, it says, new wood-like composite fencing materials may be considered. Do you know how many have been approved, or have any been approved that are composite?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
I would imagine that there are definitely some. Also with the section you're looking at on non-historic neighborhoods, those fences typically don't go to the commission. I typically approve those administratively. Unless they're trying to do something that is not in line with these guidelines, then I send that to the
Okay,
commission.
because I know the composite lasts a lot longer. I mean, it looks nice. It stays, the right color for quite some time. And then the other thing I have, there's two more things, garden and pet fencing. So there's some information here on pet fencing, and it kind of seems like it's almost I don't want to say it's a free-for-all, but if you say, hey, this is my pet area, then you get a pass on some of the other requirements. Now, typically those will be in the backyard, but, somebody could say, well, my dog doesn't like to be in the backyard, he wants to be in the front yard. So I think that's one item too. And then the other item I have is for Paul, which is there are many, many sidewalks or paths in Eureka Springs that have really big drop-offs to one side of them for people walking. So what is the city code for something like that? And we all know where these places are around town, where there's no fencing, there's no railing, there's nothing. Is there anything in code that helps you or helps the city if someone were to fall because there's nothing there? And I mean, I know because I've walked on them where you're walking along and I mean, it literally is the sidewalk butted up against the 10-foot drop.
So by code, if anything over 30 inches is supposed to have a railing. So if you have a drop off over 30 inches, it's supposed to have a railing.
Okay, so then would something like that be in our fence ordinance? Because is it considered a type of fencing or a type of safety device, or?
I would not put that in their fencing. I think that
You don't think
that could be enforced pretty simple.
Even though it's on private property?
Yeah, if it's on private property, I think we can address that pretty good. If it's on city property, I need to address that too. So.
Okay, so you think that it shouldn't be in something like this?
I don't think it would be something that your fencing would be anything to do with railings, because that just comes under a different category.
Okay.
But can I say one more thing?
Sure.
Someone said something about, we tackle, Susan, you said, let's try to do it all. And I think it's more important just take your time and do it all and not rush it, because than to try to get something out just to have something there. So if it takes a month or so months to do it, get it done right, do it right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sure,
I mean,
And
I know in our book, we have each of those different zones, and it says this is R1, R2, R3, residential or Victorian or whatever, however it's labeled, and it's pretty clear as to what is there. So we should be able to do something similar, and the bulk of it is all going to be the same anyway.
Right.
Or
agreed. Yeah,
should be
it
pretty
should be the same.
similar.
Yeah, there shouldn't be any really.
There shouldn't be too many variances, I wouldn't think. But
Yeah.
and city council is capable of doing homework and reading.
Well, and the other thing I think what we ought to do is once we get to a point and have a substantial document, we have a workshop with the city council to review it before we submit it to council. That way we're not doing a lot of, like I said, a lot of back and forth. We just kind of get an agreement and a consensus from them in a workshop, and then we can submit it. That way we'll maybe streamline some of that process, because it is, I know, we've had a lot of those back and forth.
I don't like to make comparisons or anything, but what we're talking about, making sure this is something we want to put this much time and investment in. I came in on the end of the Spring Street parking thing, and that was a long process that it really never resolved. So, like I say, this is a good discussion. This is something to talk about. But we start thinking of all the mitigating factors of one person saying, well, their fence is not right, and I just don't want to I would like to learn from that mistake of, putting all that time and effort into a project that really never came to any kind of fruition. So anyway, it's just thought and conversation we're having here, and this is a good format for it.
Sure. Yeah. And, and some of the things also the dating, the updating of information. Like, for instance, I think I want to call it false wood
Composite.
things, those are more prevalent than ever. And but are they, like I said, we now have a composite material for sidewalks. So I think maybe modernizing it with some newer ideas, and also helping the citizens, because a wrought iron fence versus a vinyl fence is night and day as far as cost. So there may be factors that we want to think about, and does a vinyl fence today versus what they were back 20 years ago, is it that bad of a look, or is it okay? I mean, and that's kind of things I want to look at too.
Right.
Go ahead, Susan.
And I like what David said, rather than focus on what kind of materials we would like or that we allow them to use, I think it's better to say what we don't allow them to use. So rather than say we prefer you not use these, it should just say, chain link, whatever, is not permitted.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
And I think that line G on a non-historic neighborhood is a good start. The only thing is that vinyl, like I said, that vinyl, one word vinyl, and I'm like, oh my gosh, because I know about 5 areas in my neighborhood that have vinyl fencing right now.
Is it good, bad, or ugly?
It's weird, because I say weird because you can see where the deer have jumped over it and clipped it and broken part of it. And so that's
So it's like hollow?
Yeah, it's hollow, so it shatters. So, and so you have this weird, where one post is, shattered, but the other ones are fine. But you got to replace the entire section. It's not like,
Gotcha.
so that's
So
one of
maybe
the things.
it's no vinyl, but composite would be
Yeah.
an option.
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. But we have to, that's the thing. And so we have to think about what we're looking at. Like I said, in my neighborhood, and what's interesting, same thing with wood fences. So with wood fences, you go down East Mountain and you'll see a couple examples of this where you've seen where an animal's come across it and has taken out several boards. Well, what's the percentage when the code guy says that's too much? Too many boards are damaged here. So we have to kind of think about that. We don't have to put that in there, but we need to think about the maintenance aspect of the ordinance. What is the criteria for the wall being maintained? What is that definition of a maintained fence? Is it look just like it was when it installed, or is it degraded by so many years, and or we're going to have a lifespan of a fence? Like if you have a wood fence, you got to replace it every 10 years. Something, you know what I'm saying? Something that would go along that kind of thing. We might have to put that in there.
Maybe it's something like, it must be repaired if a dog can go through. Because there's a purpose for them putting a fence up. It's either because they don't want you to see something, they want the privacy, they might have an animal in the back or whatever. So I actually like the historic preservation guidelines.
I do too.
So if we were to start there.
Yeah, I agree.
And then come up with, I know we've got some other things here too, but it at least gives us the basics that you were talking about, David, as far as height goes, as far as materials go. And then, then we can start addressing some of the little things on here of what we don't want.
Right.
So that we can come up with that,
Yeah. And it may that,
non-permitted.
and it may be that
list.
we just put a statement in there saying any other material not permitted. So we don't have to specify every different nuance of fencing. We just put only these materials are permitted and other materials are not permitted. So
Or just put, what would you say? Proper fencing is allowed. The following are not permitted.
Yeah.
Or
And that, you
however
have to
you
watch that word. I'm sure David jumped at that word proper. That's kind of a, you have to, unfortunately,
Subject to interpretation.
Yeah. And when you put something to subject, because I know our new city attorney will talk about that. But anyway, when we were talking the other day about those kind of verbiages, and how do get all those out of the code that's already there,
Well,
Well, it's not just us, it's the inspector. Now, he has to determine randomly what is proper, right?
Right,
You don't
right.
need to put him in that situation.
Well, and that's
not
why,
good,
when he comes to us and we have somebody asking for an appeal, that's where that comes from. But anyway, that's it. But I think, I agree with, is anyone in agreement that maybe we should, go ahead.
I've got one more question real quick. In the code, this relates to a word, will, may, isn't in the code it says that this shall determine that it has to be done. This word determines that it can be done. On number C on the preservation guide, it said that the board fences for privacy should be located in your yards. It doesn't say that it's mandatory. It should doesn't mean you have to do it. Should means that's what it should be, but maybe I don't want it to be.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
Good point. No, that's exactly right. And that's part of that we need to make sure that we get that.
But in the
If we
code,
do an ordinance, we
in the
got
code, there's like will means that you have to do it, and
Right.
should means that it's.
Yeah, so privacy
You
fences
understand what I'm
are
saying?
in the back.
Because if somebody said, well, I should have to go under 4 feet, well, should doesn't tell me that I have to. It says that that's their recommendation in a sense.
Yeah.
So I could.
And we've also
I could
got the
apply
fire
for a
marshal
6
here, I
foot
think,
fence.
today.
You understand what I'm saying, Paul?
Yeah, I would definitely go to the definitions in the code book because of the fact that shall usually means shall and should.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Those, shall means maybe and should.
Yeah.
I mean, that right there is telling me that if I wanted to put a 12-foot fence there, it's just saying that I shouldn't. Didn't
Right.
say that I can't.
Right.
I mean, and people can get specific on things when they want things.
So since we've got the fire marshal, I'm going to ask you a question because I know Tom brought this up about if someone wants to build a fence that would stop the flow of water or prohibit easy access to the property, like for a utility thing, is there how would we just say also in accordance with the fire marshal's recommendation?
So, you would get into a situation there where if I just thought that there was going to be some egregious reason why that fence was going to be a hazard to life, I would probably try to explain that to them. Obviously, if that didn't work, we may have to go a step further if the law allowed. But for the most part on a residential, I haven't seen any like that in Eureka, certainly not any that are watertight or that we can't get through. We've got tools that we can get through a lot of stuff.
Okay.
You may not like how we get through it, but we'll get through it.
it'd be more like a cement block or something like that where they've actually,
I've got saws, I can chop through that too.
okay.
All right, there you
I
go.
also think to David's point earlier, this example ordinance we have does have things like it says drainage easements, fences and walls are prohibited within any platted drainage easement. So you could include language like that for those situations.
Right. That'd be good. Yeah, because we want to make sure we include, we don't want to have any kind of gaping issues that we don't put in the ordinance. Okay. So does everyone agree that maybe the guidelines on the front and back is a good start and we can use this? So what I want to ask you guys as a commission to kind of go through and find those areas. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I have one more question for the fire marshal and for Paul. If somebody's putting up a fence, and maybe we don't have to do that in something like this, but do they have to have a way to get in that backyard? So a gate? What if somebody put a fence up and they didn't put a gate on it, and the only way into that backyard, unless you climbed over that fence, was to go through the house? Is it required to have a gate?
I don't think so in my code, no. If you
No?
want to climb over your back fence and have inconveniences for accessing your backyard, that's not my purview as the government to tell you that you have to put a
Okay.
gate
I didn't
on
know
your
if it was a
backyard.
safety thing where the,
Now,
somebody-
having said that, if it was a public space, yes, I can make you have a gate because now you're putting the public in a space and you're corralling them in there with no way to escape.
So that
But
would
in
be
your
like-
own home, you have every right to corral yourself if that's what you choose to do.
Okay, so that would be more like for like a commercial zone?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
Yes. If you have a restaurant that has like a little patio with a fence around it, that area has a seating occupancy because you fence those people in.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So if we can go through and look this over between the next time, and we'll go ahead and schedule for another workshop, if that's okay, Cassie, for next meeting time, and just bulletproof this, find those little sections that you didn't like, Michael found, and let's make sure we weed out those, and then maybe we can end up with page 1 of our ordinance, for the residential zones. Okay, so anyway, and in that, if anybody else got anything else, then we'll close the workshop. Nobody has anything else? Okay. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today.
Thank you.
Okay, and that closes our workshop, and we'll be reconvening at 6 o'clock with the Planning and Zoning Board. Okay?